Welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. My name is Dr. Gashard Harrigan, the podcast for current and emerging school leaders, those who support and supervise them. You will hear from passionate educational leaders who are transforming their schools, communities, and creating positive outcomes for students. I will also share my personal reflections and tips from over 15 years as a school leader. Together, we will talk about how to level up our schools and leadership practices. Hello, welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gashard Harrigan. Before we get started with today's episode, I want to encourage all of our listeners to join the School Leaders Podcast community on Facebook. Yes, join the conversation in our community on Facebook. So please join our Facebook community. There we extend our conversation from the episode. Today, I have a special guest, Jessica Linder. She's a teacher, author, and advocate. She teaches history and civics to recent migrant students in urban Massachusetts high school and has won several teaching awards, including being named the top 50 finalists for the Global Teacher Prize in 2021, presented by the Varkey Foundation, and being named a 2023 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year Finalist, presented by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Previously, she has taught students in middle school, high school, university in the U.S., Thailand, and Cambodia. She's an author of Making Americans, a comprehensive look at immigrants' education as told through key historical moments and court decisions, current experiments to improve migrant education, and profiles of immigrant students and youth across the U.S. across a variety of schools. Join me in welcoming Jessica to the School Leaders Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here.
We are glad you are here, Jessica. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So you said a bunch. First and foremost, I'm a teacher. I teach recent immigrant and refugee students in Lowell, Massachusetts at Lowell Public High School. And I have just absolutely amazing students in my class that I am so honored to work with every day. They come from about 30 different countries, from Colombia to the Democratic Republic of the Congo to Cambodia. And I teach history and civics. And then in addition, I write. And so about 3 years ago now, I took a year off from my teaching and set off across the country to write this book, Making Americans. But first and foremost, I am a public school teacher. I head back to school tomorrow morning, bright and early.
That is awesome. Yes, indeed. So you said you are a current public school teacher, which is awesome, which means that you're actually doing the work and working with kids in the classroom. Share some of the lessons you learned as a teacher teaching history and civics to recent migrants and refugee students.
I mean, my students teach me so much every day. And I think I am just continuously inspired by the tremendous strengths they bring to our class. Strengths in the knowledge they bring about having lived in and experienced multiple countries and cultures. They are cultural and linguistic translators often for their families. I teach high school students. They bring such tremendous amounts of grit and determination that is brought from having lived in multiple countries and navigating here a new country, and such creativity and generosity towards each other in the ways that they're constantly supporting each other. And so just really, they are inspiring, and it is so much fun to learn with them. And I think what's been powerful over the last many years that I've been teaching in Lowell with my students is seeing the many ways that they are becoming teachers in our community. And so we are just finishing up the cookbook project, which is at the end of our study of immigration of the early 1900s. We study our students' stories because, of course, my students are experts. And so our study of immigration and the history of immigration in this country is not complete without studying their stories and having them be the teachers in our classroom and the teachers in our community. And so I'm literally like after I talk with you, finishing the edits for this project. They choose a favorite family recipe. They then go to their families and have them have moms, dads, grandparents, aunts help them write down those recipes. That includes FaceTiming folks in Brazil, grandparents in Brazil, maybe texting an aunt in Cambodia. And then they write those recipes down and then they share a story of that food, its importance. Maybe it's a connection to a religion or a celebration. And then also to share a little bit about their story of migration. And we publish this cookbook and we'll be sharing it in our community in a few weeks. Another way my students are teachers in our community and teaching not only me, but so many members of our community is the work they'll do in the spring, tackling a community project they care deeply about in our semester-long action civics work. And they will, together as a class, collaborate on working with nonprofits, local leaders, maybe our local school, depending on the project they're working on, and try to create real change, real lasting change in our community. And so I think you asked, like, what do I learn from my teaching of my students is just all the amazing strengths they bring to our classroom, to that they bring to our communities, um, and also all of the ways that they are becoming our teachers and have so much to teach um, other young people and also adults in our community.
That is awesome. I love the fact that you are doing real life projects with the students and how bringing really history alive. And I think that's amazing, especially for students who are coming from different countries and trying to learn the language, trying to learn the community, trying to navigate the cultural, even the historical context of their specific, their local city. Those community projects that you are doing, some of the cookbooks that you are doing, how does this help the student learn about their community and ultimately make an impact in their local community?
Absolutely. So I think my students are all creating new homes here. And so they're building new communities here. And there are so many aspects of what it takes to build a new community. And so one is seeing that they have an important voice in the community, that others in the community want to listen to and want to learn from. And so that work we do in the spring on around action civics is really important. I see that every year there'll be a moment when a student will be drafting an email. Maybe it's to our head of school, maybe it's to a member of city council, and they will turn to me and they will go, "So, Miss Lander, this is pretend, right? Like, this is not real. We're not actually going to send this." And then I get to feel like, "Oh, no, 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 we're actually sending this." And then their eyes get really big and they sort of freak out. But it's also then really powerful because they're realizing that this is real work, that they are going to be speaking with, communicating with members of our community, and then how deeply powerful it is when they respond and they get those emails responses and they sit down in those meetings with local officials and they're seeing that their voices are important in the community, that their voices are respected and valued in the community. And that is so, so important uh, in helping them see that they have a space that they belong in this community. I think it all comes back to belonging. I know we'll talk more about that. But to make sure that they are seeing that their voices are valued in this community is really important. And so doing things like the action civics work we do, we will in a few weeks work on an op-ed project. My students will learn how to write op-eds, and then a selection of those will be published in the local newspaper. All of these are ways where our students can be seeing places for themselves in the community and seeing that they are valued in this community. And then, too, I mean, my students care so deeply about creating positive change. And they have so many ideas for ways in which they want to be supporting their classmates and their families and their neighbors. And so helping create space and time in our class to help give them the skills to go do that is really, really important. I think about my own educational journey and schooling. And the first time I was really asked to create something in class that had an impact outside of the class was in grad school. And when we did this project, I was writing an op-ed and trying to get it published. It was a really powerful moment for me because it made me think back to my schooling. And I loved my schools, and I loved my teachers, and I learned so much. But one thing that I think has struck me about this is, when are we asking students to be teachers in our community? When are we asking our students to have an impact outside our classroom? I think those are really powerful learning opportunities. And there's so many different lessons in those project-based models of teaching and in projects that extend outside the classroom walls.
I think that's awesome because, as you shared, the example of them writing to their local civic leaders. One of the things that we do, one of the projects we also do, is invite different community business leaders. And yes, it was amazing. Several this past year, several civic leaders that we brought in, and student really had wonderful questions. It helped them understand what they were learning in class and how to engage at the local level. And I think it's actually special because a lot of migrant student, ESOL students coming from different countries that may not come from democracies where as citizens we can engage our government. Oftentimes they're coming from dictatorship or different places where really you cannot write, you cannot engage you cannot write or engage your civic leaders. So I think that's very important. Learning as foreign students, learning really how democracy work and how they have a voice. Even as students, politicians do listen. In fact, they read our kids' poems. They're gonna invest more money for us locally for aftercare, just because the students say, "Hey, after school, we have nothing to do." And that was cut several years ago. And the commissioner said, "Hey, we're going to look into that and bring it up and see how we could find money." And that wouldn't have happened if we didn't engage our students in that process. So thank you for sharing that. You have written several books. Your latest book, Making American: Story of Historic Struggle, New Ideas, Inspiration, and Immigrant Education. Share with us the main points or the message from this book.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this book it has been a journey over the last 3 years. So the inspiration for writing this book came out of the work I do in my classroom with my students and all I've learned from them, and thinking about how our schools can better support immigrant origin students. How can they ensure and nurture a strong sense of belonging where our students' identities are valued and their voices are valued? They feel supported in their learning and are being set up for success for once they leave school. And so I set out from my classroom for a year to go sit in the classrooms of others. And it was so exhilarating as a teacher. We so rarely have opportunities as teachers to learn from each other. It's a very isolating profession too often. And so to just as a teacher be able to sit in the classrooms of others and learn from them, but also in the sort of the frame of trying to think about how do we reimagine immigrant education, and writing this book, it was really, really powerful. And so the book has three lenses. If we are to think about reimagining immigrant education, I think we need to look at first the past. We need to understand the Supreme Court cases, federal laws, and movements that have transformed our schools in the last 150 years. Many of these are pieces of history that have been hugely transformative. And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know many of these before I set out to write this book. But they've been deeply impactful to where our schools are today. And I'd love to share a few of those stories. They're just really, really powerful. Second, we need to learn from the present. We need to be exploring the innovative and creative approaches happening in school classrooms across the country today. And there is really exciting innovation and creative approaches in schools working with immigrant origin students. And so looking at traveling across the country, visiting schools and profiling schools from a single classroom in North Dakota to an entire school district of 126 schools in North Carolina. And then finally, and for me, this is the heart of the book, is we have to learn from the personal. We have to learn from our young people. We were talking just a moment ago about there's so many ways in which our students are teachers in our community, and they're definitely my teachers in our classroom. If we're really serious about reimagining immigrant education, we need to be asking our students and having them be our teachers. And so we can learn from them about their experience of school. And so for me, this was a book that needed to weave together these three strands of the learning that we can draw from these stories of the past, these stories of the present, and these stories of the personal. And from those three sets of stories, we can pull out lessons and ideas around how we create schools that nurture a strong sense of belonging, because it does really come back to how do we nurture a strong sense of belonging? How do we, as teachers, as school leaders, as schools, help ensure that our students, our newest students, our immigrant origin students, are feeling that this is home, that as they create homes here, that they feel welcome, they feel supported, and that they feel that this is home, that they feel that they belong here. So that's the message of the book. Some of the stories in the book are the lenses of the book, and it's just been such a powerful journey to be able to learn from educators across the country, from um, folks, courageous folks who are at the heart of this really powerful history. And so speaking to those at the heart of these stories. And then, of course, to sit down and learn from my students and have them be my teachers as I set out to learn and then to write.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing the three lenses. And as a migrant student, as an ESOL student, as you share the three lenses, I do see myself in each of those lenses in different aspect of my life. Coming to the U.S. About the age of 10, starting here right before I turned 11 in sixth grade, and my entire journey. And you said creating a sense of belonging become very important. And I will say my district did a pretty good, decent job creating that. When I came in, obviously there was a huge ESOL population, specifically from the island, who I connected with. But it was also the community that my school leaders created to make me feel welcome, to make me feel creating that whole community. So as you reflect on the book you just wrote, just published, and we recommend everybody who are listening go out and get the book, share one or two stories of schools or district that you visited and interviewed that are really implementing innovative ideas, that are in the cutting edge of implementing different ideas and leading to migrant student success.
Absolutely. And it's just, I want to thank you for sharing a little bit about your story, because it's really powerful to be learning from you. I mean, if we're serious about reimagining immigrant education, we have to be learning from students and now adults who have lived this. And that's how we are going to, I think, best understand how we create welcoming schools. How do we create schools that nurture a sense of belonging? So it's just really powerful to learn from you and hear a little bit of your story. Um, so the to your question, there are some really creative approaches, and I will just share a few snidbits of ones to hopefully get folks excited to learn more about them. And they are working in different communities across the country and with working with different groups of students. So for example, there's a school in Georgia, the Global Village Project, which is a school for refugee girls that have spent a long time outside of school. For some of them, this might be their first time experiencing formal education. And if you are a 16-year-old and perhaps you've had no formal education, you come to the US, you are often going to be put in a 10th or 11th grade class. Good luck. And that is not setting up our kids for success. And so, what this school does is it recognizes that a young person who maybe hasn't had much or any formal education, but is a teenager, is going to need different supports to be able to succeed. And so, it's a 3-year school that is just for refugee girls. And it is recognizing that they maybe will need kindergarten a level of material, and they are going to probably move up through that because it's going to be very tailored to them. But at the same time, recognizing that these are young women who have lived probably as adults for many years and carried the maturity of adults. And so that you can't have kindergarten material that is geared towards kindergartners, and you have to be respecting these young women for the maturity that they have and holding those two identities at the same time. And they do that in a really powerful way, both in the structure of the school, but also in the community that they bring into the school. And so they have this cadre of volunteers, the local volunteers that come in every day, every week, working one-on-one with these young women. And so that they are getting the support, they're able to catch up on the years of learning that they might have missed, possibly because of war or other violence in home country. And they're setting them up for success so that when they enter high school, they have a much better chance of succeeding. So that is for a very particular group of students. There are, though, really powerful other strategies that I learned about in the book and write about in the book. So there is the Aurora Action Zone in Aurora, Colorado, which is a community school approach for these 5 schools in Aurora, where traditionally a school might open at 7 a.m. and close at 3, and then the buildings sit empty. And instead, they envisioned their schools as community hubs, vibrant community hubs that would be open from sunrise to sunset. And they have been working in collaboration, these 5 schools, not just with each other, but also with the community. And so drawing in and collaborating with local businesses and nonprofits and the local hospital, and also groups of immigrant and refugee parents. And they're doing this in an ongoing way, meeting and organizing and collaborating on different projects to support students in the school. And so I think just the power of how they are seeing all of the rich assets in their community in terms of the people and the organizations that are there that can help students and just strengthen communities. And so that the communities are helping each other. It's not one way, it is two way. That's a really powerful example. And then there's another really powerful example that is looking at literacy. So in Guilford, North Carolina, there is a school district and an amazing EL team, a district level team. And they, for years, have been trying different approaches to supporting their immigrant origin students. And some were successful and some were not, but they weren't satisfied. And they, a number of years ago, learned of a different approach to teaching literacy. And that approach had students grapple with complex, rich academic language. Often they had been in the past teaching more simplified language. But this was an approach to supporting students playing with, it really is playing with really rich sentences, juicy, they call them juicy sentences. And this district team really found this idea exciting and then worked to figure out how they could implement this across a district of 126 schools, where some schools there's one school that's an all recent immigrant and refugees, and some schools maybe have 5 EL students. And so a wide range of schools, how to help teachers reimagine literacy for immigrant origin students, and doing that in all sorts of ways, from like whole on PD to weekly sessions to newsletters where they're highlighting success in different classrooms, to going to particular teachers if they're struggling and saying, can I help teach this lesson with you? Can I model a lesson? Do you need resources? Let me find you the resources. So it's like all the big and the individual ways that they are supporting teachers in helping them reimagine literacy. And then they're seeing test results shoot up. And so these 3 different examples, there are so many more from the book, but of different ways I was learning from educators who are innovating in this space in thinking about how we reimagine instruction. How do we support certain students? How do we draw in and tap into the strengths of our communities? And there's so many more, but there's just, I think I was struck by and really exhilarated by all of the different types of innovation and creative ideas and approaches that are out there in our schools. And what too was striking to me is how they are too often not known outside of their school district or their city or their state. And so, how do we, as a community of educators across the country, first identify and then connect these great ideas and programs so we can learn from each other? Also, so we can grapple with challenges together, because none of these educators and none of the schools I looked at um, would say that they're doing everything perfectly. They all have areas of growth, and they're the first to say that. But they're doing some really powerful work in their schools and their communities, and I think it's really important for us to be able to learn from them and then also to be able to collaborate with each other.
I think that's awesome because, and thank you, by the way, for going out and finding and highlighting these various success stories. Because as you share those three stores, three different places where really they are working, not perfect, but they are working to create the best learning environment. I heard supporting teachers. I heard creating intervention and supporting kids. I heard a collaborative process, bringing in both the business and the community and to be able to provide support to students. And I think that's key for all the school leaders and policymakers and emerging leaders that are listening, or even educators that are listening, is that if we are going to really create, foster, innovate, scale up our practices, is going to be providing teachers with the right support because they're in the classroom teaching the kids and they need different strategies, PDs, flexibility to be able to meet the needs of the kids in front of them and really finding the right interventions for the students in front of you because there are many interventions but some may work for your community, some may not. And it's important that you try different interventions. And when you do, you scale it up. And whether it's in one school, scaling it across the district, whether it is in one state, scaling it across the state lines, but also making sure we are collaborative meeting kids' needs. Because I know as a day-to-day school principal, oftentimes the migrant families sometimes may not have papers and sometimes they may be illegal and they still need dental, they still need to eat, the bills still need to be paid. That collaborative process, supporting the whole child but including the family in the whole, right, become very important. So whichever model, definitely getting the book and really gleaning deep into those three and more in the book. But ultimately, as leaders go about grappling with how to provide support with ESOL migrant student, is not to forget it is a collaborative process to include the business, to include the community, and obviously to provide teachers with the right of support. With that said, what are some of the key takeaways or lessons that I think that you think school leaders, policymakers who are in charge of schools or creating policy can glean from the work that you have done to really create the best policy, right? If you're a policymaker, or the right school environment and intervention if you're a school leader to really support students. Because you said a lot, but what are the key takeaways that leaders can take today and really try to implement tomorrow?
Yeah. One at the end of the book in chapter 8, I have created a guide. And this guide I label it version 1.0 because I expect it will be iterated. I hope it needs to be iterated on by educators across the country and researchers and policymakers. But it shares a series of ideas of policy and practice that are drawn from the book of ways to get us started in thinking about how we reimagine schools on day one, tomorrow. So I would urge educators listening to the podcast to check out chapter 8, where there is this guide. And what it is framed around is thinking about, and I think this is a good way as we think about like what are the types of policies and practices we want to be implementing. It's framed around what I found to be the 8 essential elements of belonging. And so belonging might be hard to understand. Well, how do we nurture a sense of belonging? And so what I found from listening to and learning from educators, from those folks at the heart of these cases in history, from my young people, are what I'm terming these 8 essential elements of belonging. And so those are opportunities for new beginnings, supportive communities. We've talked a lot about communities here. So the supportive communities. 3, those assurances of security. 4, the chances to dream. 5, committed advocates. 6, recognition of students' strengths and assets. 7, acceptance for who students are and where they come from, acceptance for all those many identities. And 8, opportunities for students to develop their voice and valuing those voices. And so I think when we're thinking about what are the policies in our schools and what are the practices we can implement in our classrooms, is when I think about it for my classroom, and as I think about it as I'm starting to work with schools and districts across the country coming out of this book, is thinking about how we are creating policies and practices around these 8 essential elements. How are we creating schools that give our students a sense of security? How are we helping them? We talked earlier about how our students are building new communities here. How can we help support them in building new communities, connecting them in? What are the policies in place where we are valuing their voices? Is it project-based learning? Is it projects that get them speaking with members of the community? What are the ways in which we are ensuring our students feel accepted for their many identities? There's so many policies and practices and the little ways in our classrooms where we show our students very powerfully if they're accepted or not. And we want to be ensuring that all of our students feel that sense of acceptance. And so I would say more than any one individual policy, because I hope people will go read the book and there's slews of ideas, is to think about how do we ensure our students are feeling that sense of belonging. And those 8 elements, I hope, are directions for us to be thinking about what types of policies and practice we can be taking to make sure our schools are really nurturing that strong sense of belonging for our students.
I think it's amazing that each school leader really should get the book and read the entire book, but definitely, look at the 8 elements to see where they are, right? Their school culture, their classroom and school culture, and wherever there is a lack or need scaling up and really work at really scaling things up and making sure that they are creating a sense of belonging, making students feel safe, feel they are part of that school community, they're included. And I think sometimes just knowing students' name and having somebody in the building that they can connect with, whether it's a teacher or even the front desk who could say hello in Spanish and French and whatever language they speak, or even as a leader teacher, just learning few words, making them feel they are welcome in that classroom is very important and will have a significant impact. And I know, again, as a migrant ESOL student, the fact that I have a difficult first name, but the fact that teachers knew my name and they knew the fact that I love to play soccer and I was on the soccer team. And even if they didn't attend, just asking me about soccer, asking me my interests, asking me, and really providing with support, really made me feel. I like to say there's a difference between saying something and making someone feel. And kids sometimes need to feel. They may know you love and appreciate them, but they need to feel it, right? And how you what they will remember most, not what you thought, what you teach them, but is really how you make them feel. And that's very important in creating a positive classroom culture, a positive school culture. And leaders that are listening, again, get the book and read the whole book, but review the 8 elements, because I think you can glean from that and begin implementing some of those ideas tomorrow to create the best classroom, the best school environment for your ESOL migrant students. As we come to a closure, and I want to thank you, Jessica, for coming on. As we wrap it up, I think it's very important that we continue this conversation because, again, our ESOL migrant population in the U.S. is increasing. And whether we like it or not, I think we need to prepare ourselves and create the best environment, the best conducive environment to really meet students' needs. And I think your book is a wonderful book to help school leaders. Again, that are doing the work daily, and the things you share are not just, yes, there is research behind it, obviously, but the point is that you are implementing these things on the day-to-day basis as a practitioner, and I think that's the key for all the leaders that are listening. So as we wrap up, again, thank you for coming on. Share your favorite book. It could be the book you just wrote, or quote, and why.
So I'll share a few. I love to read, so I'll share a few that I have been reading recently. Invisible Child by Andrea Elliott was a really powerful book I read in the last year. Beautiful Country by Xian Julie Wang. And then most recently, Emily Francis's new book. She's a teacher in North Carolina, If You Only Knew. And she is a immigrant origin student herself, and she just came out with this book. So those are three books that have been really powerful for me to read, particularly in thinking about how they impact my thinking for my own teaching in the last year.
Awesome. Again, thank you for coming on the podcast. Tell everyone listening how they can connect with you and buy your book.
Absolutely. So my book again is Making Americans, Stories of Historic Struggle, New Ideas and Inspiration in Immigrant Education. It is available wherever you get your books, on the big platforms, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. But I also encourage you to support your local independent bookstore. And so you can find it at your favorite local bookstore too. And then ways to get in touch with me, my website is www.jessicalander.com. And then I am on Twitter at Jessica_Lander. And I really do hope that folks listening will reach out. It really is going to take a collaboration of educators across the country thinking about how we reimagine immigrant education. So I'm really excited to learn from folks listening to this podcast of what you think of these stories, of these ideas, of maybe ideas that you have or work that you're doing that you want to share, or challenges you're facing that you want to grapple with together. This is really something that is it's only going to be done if we all come together and work on it. And I just hope that we can build a collaboration across the country together doing this work. So I will end with saying, I hope you get the book. I hope you find it powerful. I hope you remember that our immigrant origin students just enrich our schools in so many ways, that they bring such a wealth of strengths, perspectives, knowledge, and skills. And I am excited to be working with so many educators across the country to be creating schools that best nurture for them a strong sense of belonging, because they have so much to teach us and so much to contribute in our communities as they build new homes here.
Thank you, Jessica, for coming on. And again, you can connect with Jessica on Twitter. I will put the link to the book in the show notes. And I also encourage, if you are on social media, I just attended, I believe, Thursday or Friday, Jessica's webinar. So she's also conducting a webinar. It was very informative. So again, whatever you see that she has and you're available, I highly recommend you tap into it because it will provide you with ideas, tips of ways you can scale up as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as a school leader, even as a district person, of ways you can support school leaders to scale up and provide better education for ESOL and migrant students. Again, thank you, Jessica. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to learn from you and to be in conversation with you. So thank you for inviting me onto the podcast.
Thank you for joining me today. Please consider subscribing to the podcast, leave a 5-star rating and a comment, share this episode with a friend, and on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for leadership ideas and tips. Again, thank you for joining me today. Until next time.